doing wonderful. It's a beautiful Thursday. The weather, at least up here in Tallahassee, has cooled down substantially. It kind of feels like it did a couple months ago, and it is gorgeous. And I wish that I was outside instead of in my home office chamber, which looks like a sanitarium. But I'm happy to be here to talk to you all because we're going to talk about something very interesting today. It's our 2020 Florida legislative report. I wish that I had a physical copy to hold up and let you look at it, fold it open. But unfortunately, I don't even have a physical copy because this was all done right as the legislative session was ending and we were entering in our pandemic crisis mode where we all worked from home. So the printing, the actual physical copy went to our production staff and our fundraising staff, and they all put that all together away from the office and away from me. So this document that our team worked on for so long and shows off the, the blood, sweat, and tears of, 2.5 months, 3 months, whatever we're to call it, for the entirety of the Florida legislative session. I haven't even seen it yet physically, but I'm sure it's very nice. And many of you probably have received it. We did mail some of these out to some of our highest, our best supporters. If you didn't get it and you'd like to get a physical copy, I'm sure we can find a way to work that out with usually we give them to high-end donors, but whatever you want to do, we're happy to get them out there. But you can download your own PDF right now if you go to the link in the comment section, and we'll send you a link to download it yourself. So you just have to give us your email address and we'll send an email to you right away. We're trying to manage how that link gets distributed, so that's why we're doing it that way. So please fill out the comment and look at the comment side and fill out the form there. I appreciate you very much. So let's talk a little about the 2020 legislative session. So this year was really, I think, one of the more interesting sessions that I've ever been part of in my life. And I would say going on back from even when I was just a legislative assistant for a law firm, which was a long time ago, this would have been my, I guess, 11th or 12th session that I've been involved in some way, whether just watching or actively lobbying myself or doing comms work or something. So this one was super bizarre. Really, because it kind of felt a little like aimless at first, like we weren't sure kind of where leadership was going, what their big priorities were. It was kind of unclear. A lot was done the year prior. So, the way things usually work is that the Speaker of the House and the Senate President and their allies, of course, will have a list of priorities, like every legislator does and every leader does, a list of priorities, what they want to accomplish. It seemed like a lot of those priorities were taken care of in the first year of the 2-year cycle. So to see, to come back the next year, at first it felt a little like loose, like what are we actually trying to do here? On the environment side, we knew for a fact that the governor, along with his allies in the legislature, they were going to pass a water bill this year. Now, I don't think anyone really knew what the final form was going to be by the end of session, but that was the one thing I could have, bet on right there from day one, is that we're going to get a water bill this year. And we did, and I'll get to that in a second. Besides that, I think there's a lot of people thinking about what's going to happen with MCORS and, which was the toll road highway. Nothing happened with that really, nothing major at least. So nothing happened there. The big question for FCV, of course, is, well, we have, let me take a step back. FCV, we have 4 main pillars that we kind of box our work into, right? The first one being public lands, making sure that we have open access to parks and recreation areas and, small pocket parks, wildlife management areas, the whole gamut of public lands. Is that Florida, we are still protecting land and that they are open and accessible as needed to the populace as our state rapidly develops, which is still happening, by the way. That's number 1, public lands. Number 2, water, generally water, protecting water quality, water quantity, making sure that there's not, any kind of toxin or poison in water, or even going one step further and take it outside of the natural system, which is very important, but looking at just plain everyday drinking water or drinking water in schools for that matter. There was a great bill this year that would have addressed lead in public schools, which we thought was wonderful. We supported it. But that's like another a concept that we also look at under the water pillar. The third pillar, of course, these are not in any kind of actual order, I'm just saying them randomly, is climate change and clean energy. Personally, for me, climate change is one of the main reasons I work in this business. I remember flyering in high school back in 2000. I was passing out like literature in my senior year of high school back in Plantation, Florida. And that's really, I mean, set me on my career path, was being concerned as a climate activist back when I was 17, 18 years old. Moving on. So climate change and clean energy, trying to make sure that we do anything we can to reduce our reliance on dirty fossil fuels and foster a just transition to clean renewable energy, fossil fuel free energy. That's another pillar. And then the last pillar that I'll talk about is our democracy pillar, right? To make sure that our institutions are strong, that eligible citizens have open access to the ballot, that they can vote without complications and without threat of intimidation or without bureaucratic problems. That is really what is more fundamental to our constitutional republic than having an active and engaged citizenry as it pertains to voting, like nothing really. So that's the top of our list. Protecting our constitutional right to bring ballot questions, citizens bring ballot questions onto the ballot. That's also a high priority of ours. So we were on guard for that this year. So those are the kind of the 4 issue areas that we work in. So let's start with kind of the one at the top of my mind, which is Florida Forever. Florida Forever is the state's premier land conservation program. I'm sure many of you who follow this channel have heard from us talk about this plenty of times before, because we do talk about it all the time because it's that important. And the idea is that for decades, Florida, the state government of Florida, was putting in about $300 million a year into a pot called Florida Forever, essentially. I'm kind of making this a little bit simpler than it should, so just letting you know. So this pot called Florida Forever. Now, the money out of that pot for Florida Forever could be spent on certain projects, like certain land conservation projects. Now, these projects are ranked in like a really smart way that was actually, when they first devised this kind of ranking back in 2000, 2001, 1999, it became a model for like the rest of the Southeast, if not, broader than that, on like how do we actually prioritize the land purchases as they come through. So in this process, they are peer-reviewed, scientifically ranked projects of what will provide the most conservation good for various issues like aquifer recharge or climate change lands or wildlife connectivity, things like that. So those are ranked, but then also with which projects are like ready to go, right? Because as we all know, anyone who's bought a house or done any kind of real estate deal, they're complicated. It takes time to kind of work these things out, especially in large scale land conservation purchases. Sometimes there's multiple sellers. So figuring out all the details to that, making sure that everything's lined up at the right time. So when the governor and the cabinet pull the trigger, they say, yes, I approve the purchase of this land. It happens without a hitch, right? So it's a complicated process. So it got funded at $300 million for a long time. In about 2008, 2009, 2010, around the recession, that money dipped, which I don't think was necessarily surprising. What was surprising to, I think, everyone is that money never recovered, despite the Florida budget hitting all-time highs, every year for the past 10 years, basically, right? We're in a sustained period of growth. That money never recovered. Some years, Florida Forever was actually zeroed out, got like no money, or like $15 million, like just not a lot to keep the program even alive. So for a while there, we were really concerned that, is this the end of land conservation in Florida altogether? Which would be terrible, right? Because like I said earlier, Florida is still growing. So in response, many of you on this channel certainly helped us pass the 2014 Water and Land Conservation Amendment, which was a wonderful success, passed with nearly 75% of Florida voters. That amendment said, hey, we're going to specifically put aside a certain amount of money for things like Florida Forever, Everglades restoration, land management, things like that. Florida Forever, as you probably all well know, has yet to still recover to the previous high of $300 million a year. That is still 100% our goal, and the goal probably of the larger conservation community. I'd be surprised if anyone said, we could do with less. I don't think that's happening. But so we're still trying to get to $300 million. This year, we lobbied remarkably so much, like remarkably hard. We met with as many legislators as we possibly could. Many of you helped us produce and then distribute our wonderful GEMS report. The GEMS report, which we've sent emails out a bunch, that actually highlights the remaining properties in Florida that are yet to be bought, that are threat to be developed. Really, I mean, it can be developed anytime in a lot of these cases, and without funding, they could be lost. So we need to essentially protect them before they're gone. So this GEMS report is beautiful. We gave it to every single legislator and then some. Sometimes we brought multiple copies because we know things get lost, or the intern picks it up and brings it home and that's it, whatever. So we gave them to staff, we gave them to legislators, we gave them to people on the street, anybody we could. And thankfully, a lot of you made that happen. The production cost on that was high, of course, because it's super high quality. We wanted to make sure it was full color so people could really capture the crystal blue of a Florida spring, or that strange brownish green that you can only find seemingly in the Everglades, and it's just that remarkable kind of color that I love, or the beautiful Florida sky. So we want to make sure it really was, it captured the attention of legislators and staff as they opened it up. Understanding that a lot of legislators maybe have no familiarity with Florida Forever because they're brand new and their previous job was they're a doctor or something. So why would they know? So here's their great opportunity to learn all about Florida Forever and why it's important. Okay. So with this big campaign, we marched, to feet on the marble for all session, and the Senate very generously appropriated $125 million for the suite of Florida Forever programs, so a larger suite. The House was at, I think it was 20 million, I think is what it was at. Huge disparity. So thanks to you, okay? Thanks to you, and this is entirely thanks to you. You all used our system to send emails, which is great. We had a Take Action portal set up so anyone could type their email address in and their address, and it would connect you directly with your locally elected representative or senator. And you emailed and said, please make sure you match the Senate's number or don't go less, or whatever we said at the time. But it was make sure you get the highest amount possible for Florida Forever. I think it was in 40 hours or some crazy number like that. There was 1,500 emails sent, right? And it was still going. It was just going. I saw it all over Facebook from people. I just was searching online and was finding people sharing it all over Twitter. It was a remarkable kind of moment. And sometimes when you set up these email campaigns, you're never really sure if they're having an effect or not, right? That's just a fact. You never are really sure. But we know they did have an effect, because on the very last day of the budget session, Budget Chair Representative Holly Rashine from the House, who is in charge of the Florida Forever budget, actually said in committee, "You can stop the emails now." And that was simply one of the best moments of my year of 2020. At this rate, it'll probably still be the best moment of my year, But I was delighted to hear that, because it showed that Representative Rashine was listening, that she actually read her email, and she noticed that Florida residents are very passionate about this issue and they care. So we're at $100 million this year for Florida Forever, which is a great number to build off of, and I stand by that. And next year, we're going to keep trying again, and hopefully we can get that number up until we are restored at roughly $300 million a year. Again, and that is the goal. But I do thank you all for participating in that Take Action portal and making that happen. That's all because of you. So thank you, number one. It's a great number to build off of. Maybe you've seen in the news lately, there has been some purchases. Actually, I shouldn't say lately. A couple months ago, back when the cabinet was meeting and before the pandemic really took over everything, there's been some wonderful purchases over the past year. The cabinet and the governor have authorized some of the most remarkable, beautiful sales or purchases, I should say, for the state in recent memory. And if you love your state park, if you go to your state park and you love it, there's a good chance that public land conservation dollars helped buy that park, right? It certainly helps maintain it in some kind of way. So thank you. Our parks are wonderful. They're the gems of our entire state, and we need more of them, and to make sure we're protecting them as our state continues to grow. So thank you. That's Florida Forever. Everglades funding did really well this year. I think that, if you look back to prior to 2015 budget, which 2015 was the first budget that had, after the Water and Land Conservation Amendment that I mentioned earlier, you'll notice that funding is really gone up for Everglades restoration. And again, I think that there's really nothing more important to a restoration project than dedicated continued funding. That restoration planners and construction workers and whoever else, they can actually plan ahead to plan their work out without wondering, oh my gosh, is there going to be a gap in 2022 where we're not going to get funding, and that screws the whole planning process up. So the dedicated funding is simply one of the most important things the Florida legislature can do, and they did it. And I can't thank the people of Florida enough for, again, speaking up for the Everglades. again, I grew up in South Florida. The Everglades are near and dear to my heart. It really is what piqued my interest in conservation when I was a child, was learning about the Everglades and the Florida panther, of course, because that always, sticks out to kids a lot. At least it did to me. I thought it was cool. To see Everglades funding go up so high, I think that it's just wonderful. Okay, so moving on. For climate change and clean energy, this is kind of the area that I would say bothers me the most. Okay, for years now, advocates like myself and those giants that came before me, right, have been advocating for, hey, maybe it's time to diversify our energy grid and maybe stop relying so heavily on fossil fuels and transitioning to, hey, solar panels for the Sunshine State. Maybe we should try to figure that technology out. Other states are doing it. Other states are doing it very successfully. Even like New Jersey, which is actually where I was born. My vestigial New Jersey in me is definitely the fact that they have more solar panel usage in their grid than us is upsetting. So there was actually a climate change plan back in 2008 that Governor Chris put together with a whole team of really bright people. You can find it online. And it's like 100 and something pages. It goes through and talks about exactly some policy recommendations on what we can do to reduce our reliance on dirty fossil fuels, combat climate change, et cetera. The Governor Scott, when he was elected, that how-to manual essentially was thrown in the trash. It just was ignored and hasn't been looked at since. It's in the Internet Archive somewhere. Unfortunately, that set us back a long time. Okay, famously, everyone's heard the story, true or not. Executive branch employees, governor's office employees were not allowed to use the words climate change. So here we are now in 2020. New governor, certainly Governor DeSantis has elevated the conversation on the environment remarkably, considering what it was. And here we are in the legislature talking about climate change again, which is great. So we have legislators holding committee meetings, talking about resiliency, talking about making sure that we're prepared for sea level rise. And I love hearing that. That's awesome and needs to happen. But one thing is missing from what's happening right now at the legislature as it pertains to climate change. Well, a lot of things are, but one big thing, right? And that is, what is the plan to reduce our reliance on dirty fossil fuels? There's a lot of things that the state of Florida can do. And the fact that there isn't let's say a whole committee set up just to handle that issue, which is something we called for, by the way, 2 years ago, and we'll do it again next year, is mind-boggling to me. And at the soonest possible juncture, we need to figure out the resiliency plan and then also the weaning us off fossil fuels plan. Those two things have to go together in order to respond to this looming, pending, urgent crisis of climate change. And that's it. Unfortunately, there wasn't any kind of bill that looked like that this year that passed. There was great things sponsored. Representative Ana Escamani, Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, they had a great bill that would mandate an increase in renewable energy usage, which is a wonderful concept. And I'm sure there was a way that could be implemented in a way that would work for everyone. Other states have done it very successfully. The fact that it didn't even get a hearing this year is upsetting to me. Like, that conversation needs to happen. So that's one big problem I had with the climate change world this year. Unfortunately, there really wasn't any bills that passed. The only one bill that did pass, which is a good bill, it's just small. I'd be much more happy about it if it was part of a much larger package, because it's not a bad idea. And the idea is that before the state invests money in coastal projects like building, I don't know, a building or a parking garage or whatever it may be, is that they have to do what's called a SLIP study, which is to study sea level rise impacts on that potential piece of property before they invest taxpayer money in it, right? So like anything, it's like, hey, if we're going to build a $20 million facility here, is it going to be damaged by rising sea levels in the next 10 years, whatever it might be? So they have to do those studies now. That was sponsored by Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez and Representative Vance Lupus, both of Miami-Dade counties, and thank them both for their leadership on that. Again, perfectly fine idea. I love that it passed, but it just, there needs to be more. That can't be the end of the conversation in 2020. Unfortunately, it was. Okay. FCV, we argued very strongly throughout session, in committee. I testified personally in committee, asking legislators to please incorporate some kind of planning to wean ourselves off greenhouse gas fuels and fossil fuels, right? Didn't happen. So next year, I promise you that at the top of our to-do list for conservation voters across the state, it needs to be mandating more work on climate change issues like reducing carbon emissions and increasing resiliency funding and planning. And we say resiliency, we don't mean how is this going to affect a construction on the coast, right? We're talking about how is climate change going to affect communities inland? How is it going to affect low-income communities, people of color? These are questions that we ask ourselves every single day at the FCV office. And we are asking legislators every single day during session. So we will be looking for any bill from any representative or senator that can help address some of these really complex problems and trying to find ways to get various agencies that are in the government already, plus academic institutions, housing advocates, workers' rights advocates. I mean, all these people need to be at the table to address this crisis. And we'll be talking about that forever, probably. And that's where we're at on that. So thank you for your advocacy. We can't let up. And next year we're coming back. The third topic I'll talk about is water. Like I mentioned earlier, we knew from the start that a water bill was coming. We knew that the governor was actively advocating for it. And again, I do appreciate the governor, and I appreciate Secretary Noah Valenstein of the Department of Environmental Protection for making this a priority. I think that they didn't have to do that, and that's good that we were able to have these conversations. Unfortunately, I do think many people will say that the bill does fall short. The final product that we got, it falls short overall of like what's really needed to fix our water. Now, is it a step in the right direction? Yeah, you could argue that in some ways it is a step in the right direction. Like any step is a step in the right direction. But you could also say is that if by any means passage of this bill satisfies current representatives and senators, or even worse, satisfies the electorate that mission accomplished, job is done, that's worse. Because there needs to be another water bill next year. It needs to be. And every single year, we need to be working and thinking and talking about water issues in Florida until we get this right. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take long discussions and really smart scientists and policy people and partners from all over the state to figure this out. The agricultural community, local governments, the water management districts, groups like ours. I mean, everybody needs to be at the table to figure this out. And I hope that next year there is more that we can talk about. So stay tuned. We do write more about this in our legislative report, which you can download. And I'm not going to go through list by list what the water bill does, because it was like a 27 section bill. A lot of it was kind of housekeeping-y, like it moved like one section of an agency over to another section of agency. Like, yeah, not a bad idea, but again, that's not going to save the day here, right? And we're all looking for home runs, So again, it's got some good stuff in there. It's got some stuff that is like, okay, great. I recommend you read the full report so you can kind of see for yourself. Yeah, like I said, there needs to be more work done next year, and we'll be working on that. And we're going to need your help on that one as well. The fourth issue I'll talk about quickly is democracy. As you know, we care very much to making sure that we protect our democracy. The past 2 years have been the two most egregious attacks on our rights as citizens to access the ballot that I've seen in my career. Okay? It is now harder to bring a question to vote on the ballot to voters than it's ever been in the state of Florida since our Constitution was drafted in 1968. That's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. And our Constitution permits and allows for citizen access. The fact that there are now statutes that are essentially chipping away at that fundamental right in the Constitution is bothersome to me. If you read the Florida Constitution, it is explicit that that right to bring ballot questions to voters is explicitly guaranteed to citizens, not the legislature. And I've said since the beginning, if the legislature really wants to change that in the Constitution, guess what? They have a means to do that. They can put stuff on the ballot themselves. And the only way to change the Constitution is through a constitutional amendment or a revision commission or something like that. But basically, an amendment is their best answer. Bring it to voters if they really believe that this is something voters want. If voters want less access, bring it to voters instead of doing this kind of behind the scenes, whittling away. Which, by the way, whittling away doesn't actually make it less. It doesn't mean no one can do it. It just really what it means. It makes it more expensive. Is really what it all means. It just means you need more lawyers and more organizers and more teams and more signature gatherers and more everything to get the job done. So in theory, by trying to whittle down our rights, what they did was this, that they privileged those with the most money to get this done. And I do not believe that any of the drafters of our Constitution, or even going back to the founding fathers, hundreds of years ago in the federal United States Constitution, would have ever said that the privilege should be given to those with the most means. Power clearly resides in the people. So that is, I would say, something that bothered me personally, and I was proud of the work that FCB did to fight the past 2 years, to fight those amendments, those bills. Unfortunately, we lost one of them this year, a bad one, that made it, again, put more regulations on how signatures can be collected, the time by which they're valid, things like that. We managed to beat back another one, which is good. But by no means do I think this is the end. I think that there is a strong, contingent within the Florida House and the Florida Senate that wants to limit citizen access as much as possible. And as a public advocate, like we are at FCV, we'll be fighting that. Again, the defense of our republic never stops, right? And so we're making sure that we're actively participating in those conversations as much as possible. I do want to thank legislators who stood up very strongly on this issue. There were numerous. I remember I was at a press conference. Representative Ben Diamond was there. Representative Fentress Driscoll. Now I'm blanking. So Jennifer Webb was there, I believe. There was a bunch of legislators. I wish I had the list in front of me. I'm sorry, I forget. It's been a busy 3.5 months here. But there was a lot of legislators that stood up. Representative Anna Escamani, of course, was there, and I can't thank them all enough for their advocacy and for their impassioned debate on the floor of the House. So you can learn more about that in our legislative report, and I recommend you do, because this is to deal with your rights and your kids' rights and the future of our state. So learning more about what's going on in Tallahassee on that issue of anything is one of the most important ones. Now, undoing this is going to be a difficult thing to undo. So we have to figure out, A, how to prevent any more attacks, and then slowly, B, how do we make the ballot more accessible for people like you and me? How do we do that? And that's really the big question. Thankfully, there are a lot of smart people working on this, people way smarter than me, people in the House and Senate, elected officials, and hopefully our friendships and partnerships with them, we can try to figure out a strategy to do that. I think the governor could play a crucial role in this. Unfortunately, he signed the bill, not this year's bill yet, because hasn't done it yet. But he signed last year's bill into law, which was bad. But I think a governor, DeSantis or someone in the future, could play a significant role in restoring rights to Florida citizens. So that is something that I'll be looking at, professionally and personally, is which governor is going to defend Floridians' rights and who's not. And I'll be looking to find out who that is. Governor DeSantis has a chance to stand up here, and I hope that he does. So the last thing I'll talk about is the budget for 2020. Now, there's a huge asterisk on this year's budget, right? And the reason being is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really crippled the lives of a lot of working Floridians. People are out of work, they're struggling, they can't get through to the unemployment system. They're afraid that their lights might be shut off, that their water might be shut off. Rent is due, it's May 7th. I bet rent is due this week at some point. And where does the money go? Does it go to the utility company, or does it go buy groceries? Does it go to keep the refrigerator on for your kids' lunch? Kids are out of school, by the way. So that is something that we're dealing with, and the Florida legislature is going to have to deal with, which means that they're going to have to come back to the Capitol and do a special session to figure out the new reality of the 2021 budget. So we don't know when they're going to come back. The rumor is July. We'll wait and see. But the budget as passed, like I said, with a huge asterisk on it, it was better for our environment this year. Like, for sure, there's no way around it. The $100 million for Florida Forever was great. You know, there's good stuff coming in. A lot of it is actually due from federal grants that are coming in. There's a lot of federal money that's going as a pass through, like into Florida and then into the various programs or whatever it might be. So unfortunately, it does. The budget looks higher than it actually is. Like, the state actually has less skin in the game, if you want to call it that, than say, you know, than it looks, just because a lot of that money it's federal taxpayer money. But here's one way to look at it. So in the end, even though the legislators' demographic estimating conference has projected a 1.64% increase in Florida's population this year, the environmental budget fails to keep pace. As a percent of the total state budget, this year's environmental and associated infrastructure funding grew by less than half a percentage point, despite all we know about the growing conservation needs of our state and the urgency of addressing the climate crisis. So, like, yes, funding is higher. But when you look at the scope of the problem, which is our job as conservation voters, right, is to look at, like, well, what's actually the problems here? How do we address it? The response is not meeting the problem. And figuring that out, especially as we enter into what looks like a lower budget cycle, is going to be a huge question. Now, what kills me the most on this is that, you know, we've had 10 years of growth in Florida. It's actually the longest period of growth in Florida's history since they started taking records about economic growth. This past 10 years has been the longest stretch without a recession or a dip. And boy, what an opportunity those 10 years were to kind of set our state on the right course for our environment. And unfortunately, we missed that opportunity. So, FCV, along with our partners across the conservation world, in the progressive movement, and whoever, anybody who will listen, will work with anyone to try to find a way to protect these programs that keep our water clean for our kids to drink, that there's enough water in nature for our wonderful species, that we're addressing climate change and clean energy needs. And these are the things that we're going to have to fight for as money now becomes much more scarce. And, you know, I'm sure that some beloved program somewhere is going to take a cut, but trying to figure out a way to even it out as best as we can, and then as quickly as possible, increase that funding well above where we're at today in the good budget. Because like I said, Florida is still growing. We are still developing. They're still knocking down trees and paving over wetlands and doing all sorts of things to build more homes, more people, more septic tanks, more sewers, more everything, more wastewater needs, you name it, more highways, sadly. And until we can take care of all those things, we need to keep increasing our environmental budget. It's the cost of living in Florida, and that's just simply it. If you want a Florida in the future and you want people to keep moving here, which is going to happen, we need to be investing in things that will keep our water safe and our lands protected. So you can learn about everything I just talked about in much more detail, but less funny asides. Not really that funny, but less asides, I should say. By going to the link next door here and clicking the button and downloading our legislative report. Maybe it's below next to me. I don't know where you're looking. Maybe it's over here. Doesn't matter. Go to the link, sign up, download the PDF. We love you guys. You love us. We it's a great relationship. Conservation voters are really making a difference here in the state of Florida, and we're counting on you. Definitely going into next year and the difficult months we have ahead. I love doing these conversations, and I'm happy to come back. I think that as a special session gets scheduled, I'll definitely do another Facebook Live where we can kind of talk about what we expect. And most importantly, actually, what I want to hear from is like, what are you all hearing about? What do you care about? And how can I take your notes and bring them to legislators as I'm, walking over there? There's a lot of conversations happen all the time at the Florida legislature, and I'm happy to relay personal messages from you all to the people I talk to at the Capitol. I think it matters. I think people care. I really do. Maybe not everybody, but the best legislators care about what the people of Florida have to say. And because we're a membership-based organization, we have access to members. So please Give me your stories. Feel free to contact me. I'm not in the office, but you can contact us at contact@fcvoters.org. You can email us, and we'll try to get your question answered. I want to hear your stories, and let me take your energy and bring it over to the Capitol. Thank you all so much. I appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you are staying safe and staying home. That's what it was saying there. And have a great afternoon and evening. Thank you.